Newsline.
Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to another edition of Newsline. Today, joining our discussion is Dr. Janaka Fernando. He's a senior lecturer of the Department of Business Economics at the University of Tripura. A very good evening, Doctor, and welcome to the show.
Very good evening, Charlotte.
Doctor, we're speaking about economic recovery. We're speaking about stability in the coming year. 2022 was, of course, a roller coaster ride. We saw governments being changed. But speaking purely on the economic front, speaking about our way forward, what can people really expect in the year 2023?
Yeah, let me start with the positive note because now we have suffered heavily in last year and people are afraid and people are hopeless. Every day, several, hundreds of people migrate from this country simply because they don't have a hope or kind of positive expectations. But compared to last year, 2022, my expectations, if we can continue, if we implement right policies, we should be able to have a better year, ahead. 2023 might not be so difficult, but the thing is we need to have to implement right policies. One positive thing we noted last few months, we have seen some increase in remittances and also tourist arrivals, but the numbers are not remarkable. But that's a positive thing we have observed. So mainly our problem is lack of foreign reserves. That's the main problem, and that has contributed to the domestic, price levels of the inflation, and also shortage of essential items like fuel and other things. So our main target should be to focus on this foreign exchange crisis, which was created due to many reasons. But anyway,
Doctor, speaking a bit about these SOEs, especially the SOEs that provide us with essential services like electricity, water, so on and so forth. Now, these have been branded as massive loss-making institutions. This is, of course, in addition to Sri Lankan Airlines. Now, the government seems to be of the idea that the only way that these institutions can be made profitable is by imposing more of a burden on the general public, especially by increasing the electricity tariffs. But we haven't seen too much discussion about reducing the expenditure at these institutions, because there are opinions circulating among the general public that these institutions have many employees beyond the number that they are really supposed to have, and that institutions like the CEB have been paying massive bonuses to their staffers as well, despite the fact that they are making heavy losses. So when it comes to restructuring this, how do we draw an equitable line here? Where does the burden fall? Is it an option to maybe cut down on staff, cut down on bonuses, cut down on incentives, cut down on salaries for the employees? Or is the option to put the burden on the general public, make them pay given the coming year?
I'm a hardline on this topic because 1 year ago, last December, we had the same discussions in Mawata. That's before all these, troubles, coming to this level. But I'm telling, the government is not a businessman. Government can't do businesses, right? So government has a role. So continuously, what we have been doing, using resources inefficiently and passing that burden to the general public, right? So that's why we are talking about the, these kind of, economic killers like Sri Lankan Airlines, whatever the state-owned enterprises you mentioned, right? So basically the line, the bottom line should be, why should government interfere with business activities, right? And what kind of people are going to handle these state-owned enterprises? Are they qualified to do those businesses? Or what is the motivation for them to do a business? So very difficult to justify doing businesses by the government. Of course, there are certain areas that government intervention is necessary. I'm talking about the state-owned enterprises. So basically, what you said, everything what you said is correct, right? They are inefficient and they don't earn profits. And maybe the facts you didn't mention, even these state-owned enterprises earn profits. Those profits usually they do not transfer to the treasury, right? And they redistribute within the organization in different means like bonus or whatever. So even we claim certain state-owned enterprises are profit earning entities, general public don't get the benefit, right? So then what's the purpose of having some state-owned enterprises saying they are earning profits? So this is a fundamental problem in our system, and government, because of the expectations of the general public and also because of the mafia, or maybe the kind of picture created by certain political parties, even general public believe all the things should be done by the government, right? So this is wrong, right? Private sector is more efficient in doing most of the things, and when private sector is doing those things, general public, they usually don't get the negative effects of those wrong decisions. But for instance, let's take Sri Lankan airline, the same story, earning losses, right? And that loss transferred to the general public through the budget, right? So we have to finance it. Then government has to earn additional income to finance these loss earning state-owned enterprises by increasing taxes, right? Then the burden goes to the general public. So then we talk about the excess taxes. So what we have to do, we have to balance this equation, right? How do we balance these equations? One is government should increase revenue, right? No argument. But on the other hand, government should be able to reduce the expenses. How does government reduce expenses when there are 400 plus government, organization, and state-owned enterprises in its portfolio, right? So this is the question. So that's why your question is really valid. Why we should transfer the inefficiency in state-owned enterprises to the poor people, right? So the solution is restructuring.
So, Doctor, speaking about economic reform, the government seems to be thinking that stability is a must. And I know this is a bit of a question mixed with politics and economics, but how important is this stability of government when it comes to, ensuring that our economy kicks back? And in your opinion, is it really possible for the current administration in the state that it's in, after everything that happened here in Sri Lanka, to come to the general public and say, look here, we need a stable government, and we need this government, the current government in power, to continue to be in power for at least 2 more years if the country is to ensure stability?
A tough question. I think my voice is clear, right? So it's a
Yes.
tough question
Hmm.
because now we talk about political economy, very difficult to interpret the scenarios. But theoretically, what we always argue, stable government is important to implement any economic policy. For instance, if you take IMF or other investors, foreign direct investments, right? Foreign investors, everyone is looking at the government because they don't like if policies are changing every day. That was the case in Sri Lanka, right? So we had a kind of what we call zigzag policies, right? Deviating from one extreme to another, right? But investors, they don't like it. And also, international organizations, they don't like this kind of, sudden policy changes. When we have a stable government, what happened? We don't see this kind of, sudden policy changes. That's the only supporting argument to have a stable government, right? Even governments are changing very regularly or very frequently, like in Japan.
Doctor, when you say that a stable government or a single government, under a single government, there aren't, drastic policy changes. I think just very recently, during the past 2 years, under the administration of former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, this policy of organic fertilizer or the ban on chemical fertilizer, which is a drastic move, especially for the agricultural sector of the country, the policy was changed under the presidency of Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and then that policy was once again changed, and chemical fertilizer was allowed into the country, both under the same government. So this concept of stable government does not emanate or does not depend on there being one government in power. Does that is that accurate, Doctor?
No, what I was saying in Japan, sometimes government changes 2-3 times in a year, right? But it's a political issue, but not a big economic issue, because government to government, there are no big changes in economic policies, right? But in Sri Lanka, what you said is correct. I think we don't need to discuss those few policies that actually destroy the country, right? Those are not policies like, I don't want to say, I don't want to call it a policy, like very
Doctor, I think you
uninformed
went off
decisions.
again, Doctor. I think I went off again. Doctor, can you just start that answer again? It's okay.
Right, okay, right. Now, I think we don't need to talk about that policy. I don't want to call it a policy. It's a kind of very uninformed decision by a person who doesn't have any idea of the impact or the consequence of that decision, right? So that's why all of us, like, we are struggling here. Those actually wrong decisions actually created or expedited this situation, right? But the thing is, when the government is stable, with the assumption that government is rational, right? If the government is stable, and if the government is not rational, if the policymakers are not rational, what's the purpose of having a stable government? Right? So all these things are related to policies, right? It's stability is important if the decision makers are really concerned about the stability, right? So that's what we didn't have for last several years. So that's why I told you, like, theoretically, stable government is appreciated, because when the government is stable, we can build confidence of the investors and also confidence of the international organizations, right? But that is theoretically, right? Practically, what happened in countries like Sri Lanka, especially last few years, you try to do certain things not in a normal time. That was the mistake, right? In a crisis, in a pandemic, right? So that was the biggest mistake. So management is different during crisis period, right? So even I'm from the Faculty of Management Studies and Commerce, and we talk about management concepts, but the management in a crisis situation, we try to maintain our subsistence level, try to maintain what we have. And we don't go for like drastic changes in a crisis, because we can't predict what would happen maybe next day or the coming day. So what these people, these politicians did, they went for many, experiments during a crisis without the support of the academia, right? So many people oppose this policy. So I think we don't need to spend time to talk about that, because even now, a kid, if you ask this question from a kid, he might give you the answer.
Very, very, very accurate, Doctor. Doctor, we'll cross over to a short commercial break and continue this discussion on the other side. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Newsline.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsline. If you're just joining us now, we are in discussion with Dr. Janaka Fernando. He's a senior lecturer at the Department of Business Economics at the University of Jawaharlal. Doctor, getting back to our discussion, we were speaking about stable government. We were speaking about the importance of policy, the importance of rational government. Doctor, whenever an election is around the corner, come an election, we usually see political parties or politicians coming and making irrational promises. Irrational promises. The best example being some of the promises that were made in the past few years. I mean, if you go and take a look at certain speeches given by some of these politicians, they announced massive handouts saying, 5,000 rupees for everyone, hamper of food for low-income families, 20,000 rupees worth of goods for pregnant mothers. They even said that they will provide 250,000 in a house to all couples that marry anew after the new government comes in. So when it comes to these irrational policies, how do you think the private sector or academics, professionals in the field of economy should address these issues? Because one main concern that we've seen in Sri Lanka, at least, is that a majority of the population, although there is a high literacy rate, there is a very low economic literacy rate or a very low political literacy rate here in the country. And that's why they fall prey to these populist policies. How do you think Sri Lankans should address that?
My understanding is a bit different. Now, what has happened in Sri Lanka? Now, people have experienced several decades. When it is closer to elections, politicians come and promise so many things, and they know they don't get anything after the election, right? So what they have trained or what they have been doing actually, try to get something at least before the election, right? So that's why they actually go behind this kind of, very much, simple policies. And even before the election, sometimes they try to get something, right? The thing is, our people are not educated enough to understand these economic consequences, right? So that's why we are here today, right? And even today, some people, criticize, saying the policies implemented by past governments are correct, right? So the thing is, when we are in front of elections or near to election, right? So the politicians comes and give so many promises, but there are no any way to make them accountable for those policies or the promises, right? And then as general public, at least this time, right? This message to the general public, to you, please evaluate them. Please consider these policies and see whether it is possible to implement such policies. And implementing such policies, what kind of implications or the consequences we have to expect. Sustainability, right? So many things. So several years ago, in one election, the both parties proposed to increase salaries of the state sector employees, 10,000 by and 15,000 by different groups, right? And actually, it was implemented. These are not sustainable policies, right? Sustainable policies.
But doctor, that was although they said salary increment, it wasn't really given as a salary increment. If my memory serves me right, they just increased the allowances of all state sector employees, the allowances of which now have been slashed.
Yeah, but somehow what happened? Somehow what happened that added to their salary and added to the salary bill of the government and added to the government expenditure and added to the budget deficit, right? Added to the public debts. Okay, so now we are talking about public debts and refinancing of the debts and rescheduling of the debts. So these decisions also contributed to these excess debts. So that's why I'm telling you, economic literacy is very poor. I agree with you, because sometimes when we talk about one variable, increasing salaries, they don't understand this is connected to all the variables like inflation, public debts, and also exchange rate depreciation, right? So when you get a salary increment, you feel happy and you support the government. But once you get the other consequences, as I said, increasing government salaries affect the government expenditure and that affect the budget deficit. We finance budget deficit using borrowed money, right? And then borrowed money and this repayment comes that affects the exchange rate depreciation. Then you blame, okay, exchange rate is depreciating, cost of living is increasing, right? So this is the thing. But that's why I start the answer saying we can't blame the people because they are suffering for last 3-4 decades. So they try to get something. That's the reason.
Exactly, Doctor. It's a very vicious cycle that keeps on continuing. And now that Sri Lanka is in the position that we are in right now, which can only be described by words such as deplorable and well, all the bad words along those lines. But of course, there is still hope. It's never lost. Our country has bounced back from various other calamities as well. And this time around too, we can bounce back. But of course, we can't bounce back if we just sit back and do the same things that we were doing in the past few years. Of course, people have understood this. That's why we saw several movements in this country, the youth standing up. Doctor, let's hope and pray that something good might come out of all the suffering that we are going through right now. Thank you very much, Dr. Janaka Fernando, Senior Lecturer at the Department of Business Economics at the University of Jayawardhanapura, for joining us on our show this evening. Thank you very much to all our viewers out there.
Yes, I have one more, like the last
Yes,
message.
Doctor.
Yes. You know how I joined these sessions because media also play a very big role, right? Few years ago, economic issues were discussed by some, actors, actors, and some people, general people, right? But now you're giving more space for economists and the people who know the subject. So we have a chance to share our knowledge. Thank you very much for creating this space. That's why whenever I get a chance, I mean, I get a call, whatever my schedule, I try to join with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Janaka. And we highly appreciate you taking time off your busy schedule. And I'm pretty sure the general public of this country also appreciates the same. Thank you very much also to all our viewers out there for tuning in to Newsline. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.